Vanakkam. Hello friends. We have been seeing about the rule of the Kalabhras in Tamil country that started from around 250 Common Era. We saw in detail about the Pulanguruchi inscriptions that revealed that the Kalabhras were able administrators. More importantly, it revealed that the Kalabhras were liberal rulers with a very tolerant outlook towards all religions. Though they themselves adhered to the heretic faiths of Jainism and Buddhism, they patronized Saivism and Vaishnavism. The Kalabhras were a major power in Tamilagam, ruling for over 300 years from around 250 to 550 Common Era. Now, this was a period of transition in the Tamil country from Sangam era to medieval times. That it was a period of unrest is evidenced by the facts given in the Pulanguruchi and Karur inscriptions that show the kind of protection that was given to all religious places of worship. The Pulanguruchi inscription talks of the Muppuru Kappar, Purankappar, the Attikoyattar and Ulmanayar, who offered protection to two Devakulams, temples of Shiva or Vishnu, and a Kotam, which was a Buddhist temple. Again, a Jaina inscription found at Vadugapatti showed how private armies known as the Kulichevahar, literally meaning hired soldiers, to protect a local Buddhist shrine, while the Karur inscription mentioned three bodies that were involved in the protection and administration of again a Buddhist shrine, the Atti Kosamudai Kosam, the Aimperunkulu and the Sangam. So what we see is that in general, places of worship of all faiths were extended protection under the Kalabhra rule. And in this, the Kalabhras were supported by several chieftains and the armed forces of the trade caravans, the Vanihachat. We saw how the Kalabhras renamed the territories won by them as Mangalams. The Mangalam was an administrative unit like a taluk and had a mandram in the middle as a focal point. Every Mangalam had a kotam dedicated to a Mangai, a Buddhist virgin goddess. The twin epics of Silappadiharam and Manimehalai were composed during the Kalabhra rule. Ilango Adigal, the author of Silappadiharam, claimed to belong to the Chera royal family, was a Jaina monk, and the author of Manimehalai, Seethalai Chatanar, who was Ilango Adigal's contemporary, was a Buddhist monk. The story of Silambu starts at Puhar in the Chola country and then enters Madurai in the Pandya land and finally ends in Seranadu. Ilango Adigal writes of Madurai being under the Pandya rule in the story, but while he himself was composing the epic somewhere between the 3rd and 5th century Common Era, large parts of Tamilagam were definitely under Kalabhra rule. Ilango Adigal writes about how the hero Kovalan's ancestors once got caught in a sea storm and it was the goddess Manimehala who saved them. So Kovalan names his daughter as Manimehalai after this Manimehala Devam, who was the presiding goddess of the Kotam at Puhar. The story also mentions how the heroine Kannahi entered the heavens in a place called the Sri Purnagiri Hills, from which the Periyar river originates. The story goes that this was narrated by local hunters to the then Chera king, who ended up building a kotam in her honor. Dr. Padmavati shows how the Kudalur inscription in that region records a temple named Mangala Madande Kotam for a Mangala Devi Amman. This inscription carries a list of the names of traders who contributed towards the construction of the Kotam. The land donated by the tradesmen went by the name Ainyutruva Mangalam, and the Mangala Devi here was a Buddhist goddess. She was known by several names like Pidari Amman and Jeshta Devi, and her shrine was known as the Kamakotam. Now, when we say Kamakotam, we are reminded of Kanchipuram and the Kamakhya Amman temple. Kanchipuram was a famous center of Buddhism right from the early Common Era, and the branch of the Kalabhra clan that rode into Kanchipuram were incidentally Buddhists. Excavations carried out by the ASI together with the Tamil Nadu Archaeological Department revealed a Tara Devi figurine on a pillar in what must have been a Buddhist vihara at Kanchipuram. In the same complex, an 8-foot high Buddha statue was also recovered, and these relics were dated to 3rd century Common Era by archaeologists. This shows that Kanchipuram was an important center for Buddhism way before the advent of the Kalabhras. Buddha statues dated from the 4th and 5th century have been excavated all around Kanchipuram. In the Periyapuranam story of Sakya Nayanar, which we have seen earlier, Sakyar goes from his place of Tiruchangamangai in Nagapattinam district to Kanchipuram to master Buddhist philosophy. History shows that Nagapattinam too had a very close relationship with Buddhism, and Buddhism flourished here right up until the 16th century. The Chudamani Vihara, a very prominent Buddhist vihara, was constructed in the 10th century during the time of Rajendra Chola I by one Sri Vijaya, who was a ruler of a Southeast Asian kingdom. This vihara thrived for a very long time. Hundreds of bronze statues of the Buddha, dated to variously between 11th and 16th century, have been excavated by archaeologists from the regions around Nagapattinam, all testimony to a great Buddhist tradition that thrived there. A rare palm leaf manuscript found in Nepal mentions a place called Ottiyanam, where there was a Manga Koshtam and a figurine of Vajrapani. Now, scholars have identified this Ottiyanam with Kanchipuram and the Manga Koshtam with the Mangai Kotam, that is Kamakotam in Kanchipuram. So, Kamakotam, that was once upon a time dedicated to Tara Devi, the Buddhist virgin goddess, has now been converted into a temple for Kamakshi. And interestingly, a huge Buddha statue has been excavated right from within the Sankara Mutt, under whose auspices the Kamakshi Amman temple functions now. Kamakotam reminded me not only of Kanchipuram, but also of the famed Kamakhya temple of Assam. I had the fortune of visiting this temple recently, and here sits the Nidambasudini, a virgin goddess, and the biggest annual festival of Ambabuchi Mela celebrated here marks the beginning of the menstruation of the goddess. In Tamil, we say Paruvam Adaidal. Though it is totally irrelevant here, a bit of superficial digging into the history of Assam showed how that in ancient times these regions known as the Kamarupa kingdom were under strong Buddhist influence. As early as the 3rd century BCE, during the times of Emperor Ashoka, Theradhitika, a Buddhist monk of the Theravada faith, had been sent to Kamarupa kingdom to spread Buddhism. Archaeological and literary evidence show the strong presence of Buddhism in this region till the 4th century, after which the Kamarupa kingdom was taken over by the Hindu Varman dynasty. It is most likely that the ancient seat of Kamakhya in the Kamarupa kingdom was also a Buddhist virgin goddess. The story of the 51 Shakti Pidams were created by the Vedic priesthood by integrating the ancient pan-Indian virgin goddess culture of India, that is the Kannideva Vazhipadu, combining it with the Pidari Amman cult as found in Kanchipuram and Kamakhya. All the Pidams went under Brahmin control and Sanskrit influence, desecrating ancient native traditions and local languages. Now, who was this Vajrapani of the Manga Koshtam mentioned in the Nepal manuscript? Dr. Padmavati gives a brilliant hypothesis to establish the identity of this Vajrapani as the Vedic god Lord Indra. She explains that similar to the creation of a Tara Devi in order to integrate the pan-India Kumari worship, the Vedic deity Indran too was adapted into the Buddhist fold from as early as 6th century BCE. Indra was a very popular deity at that time, and as proof of this, there are statues of Indra worshipping the Buddha found at Madura in North India. She also takes cue from the weapon Vajrayudham, which is typically associated with Indra. So the name Vajrapani comes from the Vajrayudham, and she shows old texts such as the Karanahamam and the Suprabhedahamam, wherein the Vajrayudham is mentioned as present in the hands of Sasta. Sasta is a name that comes from the term Sathu, which means trade, and in Tamil becomes Satan. Dr. Padmavati shows that from ancient times the terms Satan and Sati were associated with traders. In Sangam literature, there are poets with the name Sathu, such as Madurai Koolavanihan Satanar, Anduvan Satan, Adudurai Masatanar, and Okkur Masatiyar, whom she claims should have belonged to the heretic faith. Then there were poets with names like Dharmaputtiran, Siruven Therayar, Sangavarunar, and Ayyadi, who by their very names make it clear that they were of Buddhist faith. Now, Silapadiharam and Manimehalai talk of the Indra Vila at Puhar. She claims the reason why he was celebrated in these epics is because Indran was Satan or Sasta, the protector or Kaval Devam of the Mangai Kotam of Buddhist faith at Puhar. Dr. Padmavati gives a very interesting evidence from an inscription in the Ukkal temple of Thiruvannamalai district, where it reads, Siva Sulamani Mangalamahiya Sri Vikramabarana Sadurvedi Mangalam. This inscription shows that how the Mangalams got renamed as Sadurvedi Mangalams after the Kalabhra role thanks to Vedic influence. The inscription mentions how there was a Mahasasta temple to the north of the Ambalam in the Suramani Mangalam. Endowments were made for the protection and administration of this temple, and the Sata Ganatar were entrusted with the duty of administering them. The term Ganatar was used to denote government officials. Sata Ganatar obviously were officials involved in protecting a Buddhist shrine. An inscriptional evidence in Tirupurangundram shows how in Pandya country, the wife of an official named Satan Ganapathy created a rock-cut shrine for Jeshta Devi that still remains. In his commentary to the Silapadiharam, the 12th century commentator Adiyarku Nallar refers to a very interesting sayul that goes, Kachi Valai Kaichi Kamakkotankaval Mechi Inidirukkum Meichatan Kaichendu. Kachi meaning Kanjipuram, Kamakkotam Kaval meaning the one who protected the Kamakkotam. He was the Meichatan, the righteous Chatan, with a chendu in his hands, the chendu being the Vajrayudham. Dr. Padmavati shows how some old Amman shrines in the deep south of Tamil Nadu have this Chatan with a chendu as protective deities. The temples such as the Bhagavati temple at Kanyakumari, the Madappuram temple near Madurai, and the Periyakomati temple in South Arcot district, to name a few. So Vajrapani was Satan, the Vajrayudham, always associated with the Vedic deity Indran, who metamorphosized into Chatan with a chendu. This Satan or Sasta later came to be known as Ayanar. For this, Dr. Padmavati gives inscriptional evidence from an Ayanar temple in a place called Tirupidavur near Tirupattur. About 19 inscriptions are found in the Tirumandabam Udayar Koil in this region. Now, this Tirupidavur is a very ancient place, finding a mention in Sangam poetry. Ruled at one point of time by one chieftain, Sola Nattu Pidavur Kiran Mahan Perum Satan. This chieftain is sung by Madurai Nakiranar in a Puram poem, and the verse in the poem goes, Arungadi Pidavur Arapper Chatan Inayem Perumavena. That means Perum Satan, who came from the lineage of the righteous Chatan of Pidavur. So we have proof that this ancient Ayanar shrine at Tirupidavur must have been around 2000 years old, and the Arapper Chatan here was Indiran. Dr. Padmavati makes this claim based on an important reference taken from Sekirar's Periyapuranam. One of the 63 Nayanmars, Cheraman Peruman Nayanar, ruled from Kodumbalur in Kerala. A Chera king, he was also a hymnist whose poetry finds a place in the Tevaram. He befriends Sundarar, the 8th century hymnist and Nayanmar, whereby we are able to fix his time. Periyapuranam narrates how Cheraman Peruman Nayanar and Sundarar became very close friends. We cannot go into the details of the story here. Towards his end, Sundarar goes to Thiruvanjaikalam and renders a heart-wrenching poem on Lord Shiva, asking him that he be relieved of this worldly life. Lord Shiva sends a white elephant to Thiruvanjaikalam to bring Sundarar to his holy abode of Mount Kailash. This very important concluding portion of the Periyapuranam is known as the Vellai Yanai Charukam and elaborates Sundarar's ascent to the heavens. As Sundarar ascends the heavens, Cheraman Peruman becomes aware of this and, unable to fathom living in this earth after the departure of his dear friend, he too decides to go to Mount Kailash. And how does he do that? He whispers the Panchakshara Mandram of Namachivaya in the ears of his horse, and the next minute the horse takes him to Kailash. Sundarar, upon arrival, is overjoyed to see his friend, and together they enter Kailash. But Lord Shiva's Bhudaganas stop Cheraman Peruman, telling him that his time hadn't yet come. The story goes that Sundarar went into Mount Kailash, met Lord Shiva, and recommended that Cheraman Peruman, who was made to wait outside, be permitted to enter. Lord Shiva obliged, and Cheraman Peruman, upon being ushered into the presence of the Lord, requested that he be allowed to sing a hymn. He renders the Thirukailaya Jnana Ula right there in Mount Kailash in the presence of the Lord. The Lord is pleased and accepts him into Kailash. And what is of interest to us are the verses rendered here by Sekilar. Sera Kavalar Vinnappam, Seida Attiruvula Puram Andru, Saral Velliyam Kailayil, Keta Masatanar, தரித்து இந்த பாரில் வேதியர் திருப்பிட ஊர்தனில் வெளிப்பட பகிர்ந்து எங்கும் நார வேலை சூழ் உலகினில் விளங்கிட நாட்டினர் நலத்தாலே. The Thirukailaya Ula was rendered in heaven, and in order for the people in earth to benefit from listening to it, Masatanar, who was presiding over the court in the heavens, was ordered to bring the hymn to Tirupidavur. Vediyar Tirupidavur, meaning that Tirupidavur at that point of time had become a Vedic stronghold. So, who presides over the court in the heavens and who incidentally also has a white elephant? Lord Indra. I tend to agree with Dr. Padmavati. Why? Because another interesting point in support of her view comes from this part of the story itself. Now, as he was ascending to the heavens, Sundarar rendered a hymn on Lord Shiva, which goes by the name Nodithan Malai Padiham. Nodithan Malai, of course, referring to Mount Kailash. Sekilar writes of how Lord Shiva himself ordered Varuna to bring this soul-stirring Padiham from the heavens and render it to the people at Thiruvanjaikalam. So, Adi Vendanam, the Lord of the oceans, Varuna, is bade by the Lord to bring a Padiham to Thiruvanjaikalam. Since the very next hymn talks of Masatana bringing Cheraman's hymn to Tirupidavur, it is apt that the Lord could have assigned it to the god of thunder and lightning, Indra. Indra and Varuna were the most important of Vedic deities who had been popularized in Tamil country by the Brahmin priesthood. It is interesting to note how this Tirupidavur is included in the Kshetra Kovai rendered by Thirunavukarasar, the Saivite saint who lived in the 7th century Common Era. The Kshetra Kovai enlisting a series of important Shiva shrines across Tamilagam. So, sometime after the end of the Kalabhras rule, Tirupidavur, which was a Buddhist shrine dedicated to a Pidari Amman with Indran as the Pidavur Perinjathan acting as her guardian deity, had been taken over by the Saivite fold and converted into a Shiva temple. History shows how people and their religious leanings changed over time, mostly on account of political manipulation. Mannan evvadi, kudigal avvadi. The people simply followed the ruler, no questions asked, especially in the matter of faith. Places of worship and even the gods were taken over and adapted into whichever religion held the king's court at that time. The 300-year-old Kalabhra interregnum definitely strengthened the presence of Buddhism and Jainism across Tamil country. But for their rule, these faiths would have disappeared much earlier than the 7th century, the period that saw the rise of the Bhakti movement and the spread of Saivism and Vaishnavism that systematically destroyed the heretic religions. But we see that they did not disappear completely. Similar to the proof seen in Nagapattinam, we can see that Jainism and Buddhism thrived in other pockets of Tamil country for centuries through the archaeological relics. But eventually they lost out to Vedic religion and their viharas and deities got integrated into the Vaidiha Madam. Even today, in many temples in Tamil Nadu, you can see a Pidari Amman or a Jeshta Devi relegated to an obscure corner. Recently, when I went to the Tiruvadavur Sivan temple, the birthplace of the most holiest of Saivite saints, Manikavasahar, I was surprised to see a Pidari Amman right inside the Sivan Sannadhi. The next time you see them, think of the Kalabhra rulers. We will continue with the fascinating history of the Kalabhras in the next episode. Vanakkam.